Most people think that they understand questions. At least they've had some training in questions. But did you know that the single least important thing about asking a question of a client or candidate is the actual question itself? What really matters about questions is what comes immediately before the question and what comes immediately after the answer. Because once you've actually mastered those things, you'll get far better responses from every question you ask, whether it's to clients, candidates, prospects, whoever. And you'll be able to stop the conversations that you have from being the typical recruitment interrogation, where you've got this checklist of questions you want to get through. And you can actually turn it into a conversation that leads to you making deals and bringing in the revenue. I'm still surprised that this framework, this knowledge, isn't more widespread. It isn't understood or taught by, I don't think it's taught by anybody else, actually. If I'm wrong on that, please let me know in the comments. But I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, because although I developed this 20 years ago, and I've been teaching it ever since, I've been in sales 20 years, and I've been running my own training business for 10 years before I actually worked out this process. I'd been trained on NLP, I'd been trained in behavioural psychology, I'd done any sales or personal development course you can think of, I'd done it. And honestly, all this came together in one sort of blinding moment. I was listening to a couple of friends talking with each other, and being an extreme introvert, might not seem like it on these videos, but in my real life it's true. Being an extreme introvert, I was just sort of sat there watching them and listening to them, and I suddenly went, oh, hang on, and realised that their conversation was made up of asking each other questions and giving each other answers. But the important bit wasn't the questions, because that isn't how conversation works. The important bit was, well, let me explain. The framework is that there are 4 parts to a question. There's the setup, which is what comes immediately before the question. There's the question itself, typically open questions, how, what, why, where, when, who. There's the answer or the response, and then there's the follow-up. Okay? And of all those pieces, most training is about the question, and we kind of assume that we'll get the answer that we want, but normally we don't, is the God's honest truth, because we haven't set the question up properly. And when we do get an answer, we normally just ignore the answer and go off and ask another question. So the 2 really important bits, which is the setup and the follow-up, they never really get taught, and I don't understand why. So let me explain a bit more. The easiest way, I think, to explain this is to give you a slightly silly example. If we were friends, we've been on holiday together 10 years ago or something, and I said to you, what was the name of the guy that ran the bar down on the beach? I just asked that question, boom. No preface, no context, no nothing. I just asked you that question. You'd probably go, even if you could remember vaguely, you kind of go, oh, what guy, what bar, what beach, what? Because it's just bang, a question out of nowhere. There's no context, there's no previous situational stuff, and it's just completely random. And yet, odd as that would sound, that's how most people ask questions in a sales context or in an interview context. So let me give you an example of how you'd probably do it in real life. You'd probably say, oh, do you remember when we went on holiday to Crete? And when you came out of the hotel, down at the beach, there's that bar on the right. You know, the one where we went most nights, and there's that guy behind the bar. Oh, what was that? What was he called? What was that guy's name? So I've talked you through when we went on holiday to Crete, and as you left the hotel, you went down to the beach, and you turned right, and there was that bar at the end, and there was the guy who worked behind the bar that we saw all the time. What was his name? Now that setup is the equivalent of, before you ask somebody a question about a book, maybe it would be worthwhile to get them to read a chapter of the book and then say, oh, what was in that chapter? Or read a chapter of a book and go, oh, what was the name of the lead character? Because that setup allows you to access the information before I ask you about the information. Does that make sense? Yeah, you wouldn't ask somebody to sit down and do an essay about a book without letting them read the book first? It just wouldn't make any sense. And our brains are full of life experience and dreams and desires and dislikes, and that's all sat there in our brain. And in order to access the right memory or the right information, you've got to give somebody the clues to access the right bits of information. And that's what the setup is about. I'll come to the follow-up later. But that's what the setup is about. And I could go into a lot of detail on this, but I won't on this video. If this one takes off, maybe on a subsequent one, but not right now. But what you can do, think of it as having two parts, two potential parts to the setup. The first is what I just demonstrated, the focus phrase, where you get somebody to focus on a particular memory or a particular goal or set of desires or a particular set of problems or a particular set of dreams and goals that they have. Now, focus phrase or focus phrasing is why I'm saying to you, oh, holiday Crete, out the hotel, down to the beach, turn right, go behind the bar. All of those are focus phrases. So in an interview context, so if I'm talking with a potential candidate, I might say, okay, well, if you think about day to day or the average week in your current role, there'll be stuff that goes really well. There'll be stuff that it's all right, and the stuff that's just awful. There's stuff that you have to put up with, and you sort of tear your hair out. What would you say is the most sort of difficult part of the role at the moment? Now, all that preface, that setup, thinking about your current role, there'll be stuff that goes well, there'll be stuff that's all right, there'll be stuff that has you tearing your hair out. And then I ask the open question, which is, what would you say are the difficult parts of the job at the moment? Now, if I just ask that question out of the blue, would I get an answer? Possibly. Would it be rich and involved and in depth and engaged? No chance. None whatsoever. But that setup gets me into a conversation so that I can ask an open question about what's in their head, and they'll answer. Now, I'm not going to say that you're going to get this massively involved, perfect answer that immediately gives you all the information you need, and you can ask this negative framing question and get them to think about their pains, and you can ask a positive question and get them to think about what excites them. You're not going to get that you're rarely going to get that just from one question. But there's another part of a setup that is hugely useful for those of us in the influence business, and it's what I call an inoculation. After COVID, we are all massively familiar with immunisation, inoculation, all of that stuff. So I'm not going to explain it too much. But basically, the way an inoculation works is you give somebody a slightly changed or inert version of a virus, they develop antibodies, and then when they're confronted with the infection, they may get some symptoms, but they're massively less than they would be normally. You might get a sniffle or a sore throat, as opposed to ending up in hospital. So what we're going to give somebody, what we have the option of giving somebody, is a psychological inoculation. Ooh, that sounds all edgy and scientific-y and ooh, dead simple. If you think about potential objection to a question, so if I'm going to ask somebody what's the most difficult part of their job at the moment, well, they potentially come back and go, absolutely nothing. My job is wonderful. If I wasn't happy, I would already have applied for roles, and I haven't. So never darken my doorstep again. Never darken my towels. Okay, a bit overdramatic. Not like me, a bit overdramatic. But if instead you did the focus phrases, there'll be some stuff that's going well. There'll be some stuff that's all right. There'll be some stuff that has you tearing your hair out maybe. The inoculation part would be, I'm just, making assumptions here. It could be that there's nothing in your role that you aren't really thrilled with. It could be that. But let me just ask you, if there was stuff in your current role that you wouldn't be happy with, what would it be? So that inoculation, it could be that you're perfectly happy. That's unlikely because they wouldn't be having a conversation with you. Or you could say to a prospect, it could be that everything and your current recruitment process is perfect, absolutely. But if there was something you could change to make it a bit quicker or smoother, what would it be? And that focus phrase and inoculation just makes it easy for somebody to answer the question because they've accessed the information and because they've not got anything to object to. They can't turn around and go, "Whoa, everything in my process is entirely perfect at all times," because that's silly. Or everything in my job is perfect. That's nonsensical. You can also use an inoculation to set up the slightly awkward parts of the conversation. So you could say to somebody, I mean, this might sound like a slightly strange question. And then no matter what you ask, the worst response you're going to get is, yeah, that does actually sound like a strange question. But, and then they'll answer. So this might seem a bit of a strange question. This might seem a bit over-direct. This might seem a bit probing. This might seem a bit personal. This might seem a bit unusual. It might be a bit early to ask this. There's any number of ways to inoculate. And inoculation is simply, this might be, it could be that. State the objection, potential objection, and then just carry on. But let me just ask you. But let me ask. So you voice their potential objection and ignore it and ask the question anyway. And if you've done it properly, what you'll get is some kind of answer. May or may not be in depth, may or may not be perfect, but you'll get a response. Does that make sense? There is a third potential piece to the setup. I didn't mention it initially because it's something I rarely use, but it's called a signpost. And it's where you could say to somebody, oh, the reason I'm asking this is, or where I'm going with this is, and you tell them the direction of travel. You explicitly tell them where the conversation's going. Personally, I don't use it that much, but when I do, it's to make sure that there's clarity and they're not confused. So it's just there. So I said there were two parts, there's potentially a third, but maybe I'll cover that on a different video. Is this making sense so far? If it is, and if you're enjoying it, hit the like button. If you have questions, put them down in the comments below, and I'll answer every single question as quickly as I can do because I answer them all personally. And also, if it's useful, hit the notify and the subscribe button, and that way you won't miss out on any of the recruitery goodness which is coming down the pipeline for you. Okay, so we've talked about the setup. We've then got the question. Now, the question itself, generally best to use open questions. How, what, why, where, when, who. I'm sure you've probably been trained in that previously. Personally, I tend to try and frame my questions. So I'll tend to either ask positive framing questions. What's the best? What's the easiest? What's the quickest? What's the most simple? What's the most effective? What's the easiest? And negative framing questions. What's the worst, hardest, slowest, most difficult? And I'll tend to ask positive framing questions about making a change, about working with me, about taking on a new role, about whatever. And I'll tend to ask negative framing questions about their current situation, their current supplier, their current role. Does that make sense? Because if you can create tension between a positive outcome that they want, a gain that they want to have, and a negative situation that they're trying to avoid and get away from, a pain, you give them something to move towards and something to move away from, and it creates a tension. It's like stretching a rubber band, and it creates a kind of propulsion machine. And that tension, gain, pain, toward, away from, that creates that motivation in people. So set up with focus phrase, inoculations, possibly a signpost, open question, positive or negative, and then you get their response, you get the answer. And oh, well, that's it. The heavens open, the angels sing, you know exactly what to do, they're ready for a pitch, and they're obviously going to do whatever you ask them to do. No, I wish that were the case. I know that's how a lot of people present training in questions, but that's really not the reality. You know it, I know it, they know it. That's just not the way it works. So the reality is you'll get an answer. And depending on how engaged somebody in the conversation is, depending on how much rapport you've built with them, rapport being the basis of everything. If you've got enough rapport, you can get away with just about anything. If you haven't got enough rapport, you can't give somebody money. You couldn't give somebody cash without rapport. Trust me, I've tried. Actually, that's a whole other video. Me on Regent Street trying to give people 20 quid. Hysterical. Total abject failure. I could not give money away on the street in central London. It was hysterical. We tried for 2 hours, nearly got arrested. Hysterical. Anyway, whole other video to come. So you've got their response, and it's probably a bit limp, a bit soggy, a bit vague. So now comes the follow-up. And the follow-up is where you ask additional questions to turn their initial answer into something more meaningful, more motivational, or if not that, at least clearer, at least more comprehensible. So back to our bar on the beach, yeah, blah, blah, down to the beach, turn right, bar, guy's name, what was his name? Miko. Okay. What was that drink that we were having? What was it that Miko served up all the time? That's the follow-up question. It's how conversations happen between people all the flipping time. There's a bit of waffle, there's a question, there's an answer, you go off in a different direction. That's the follow-up, where you change direction or get more information, get more meaning, get more significance, get more detail, get more facts from what somebody's talking about. That's the importance of the follow-up. It doesn't just turn an interrogation into a conversation. It does that beautifully, but it also gets you to the real detail. It gets to you what they're really thinking, what they mean, and why it's important, and why they're saying that as opposed to something else. And it's simple questions. You simply say, okay, how do you mean? Or in what way? Or what's your definition? Or could you give me an example? Those are my 4 most popular questions. How do you mean? In what way? What's your definition? Could you give me an example? And simply asking those questions will get somebody to expand on their answer. And as they expand, you can do different things with it. It can either be a factual response, which gets you more detail, more facts, more information. Happy days. It could be that they talk in more and more detail about what they're unhappy with, why they're unhappy with it, what a terrible situation it is, how much money it's costing them, how much stress it's creating for them. You could get them to talk more about all the negatives, and the more they talk about the negatives, the more negative they feel. Or you could talk about what they're excited about, why they're excited about it, what it will mean for them, how it will help. And they'll get more and more excited and more motivated when they're talking about what they could have, be, do if they do this thing. So it's either giving you more information, or it's making somebody more negative or more positive, or all 3 at the same time. See, when most people are preparing their recruiting processes and they look at the recruiting scripts, they have a series of questions. 8, 10. I've seen one that was 4 pages of questions. It must have been 40, 45 questions that you're going to ask a potential client or a potential candidate. It was insane. And it was nuts. Can't imagine why I got the assignment. But here's the really cool thing. Once you've mastered this process, you can probably ask 3 or 4 core questions. And if you follow up well enough and thoroughly enough and persistently enough, you probably get all you need to either sell them on working with you, to look at your candidates, to take on a role, simply from 3 or 4 questions. 3 or 4, if you like, the base questions. Set them up well, base question, answers, follow up, follow up, follow up, follow up, follow up, follow up. Change the subject, ask a different question. Because that is how conversation actually works. If you're not sure whether I'm talking out the wrong end of my torso, listen for a while. Just listen to your colleagues. Listen to people on the tube or on the train or on the bus. Listen to people in the pub or the Starbucks or whatever. Just listen to other people's conversations. Do it discreetly. God's sake, do it discreetly. But just listening to what other people are saying. And you'll realise that it always goes through that 4-step process. Set up question, answer, follow up. Always. A lot of conversations are just follow up to one original question. That's how conversation works. That's how we start talking about one thing and then 5 minutes later we're off in a completely different subject. You ever wondered how that happens? Now you know. Now, if you want to really get the maximum amount of juice possible from a positive or a negative question, look to use the follow-ups to create impact. So ask somebody why. Why is either the most dangerous or the most useful question for an influencer. If you're talking about something positive, about working with you, about making a change, about working with you exclusively on this assignment, whatever it may be, then ask why they're interested, why they think it's a good idea, how it will help them most. Ask them why. If, on the other hand, they're raising concerns, oh, I'm not sure I should go with you, if you ask them why there, that's a really bad question, because they'll tell you. And the more they tell you, the more they dig into that belief. So, the question, why? Either really useful or really dangerous, depending on how you use it. Other questions you can use when you get an answer. Oh, how will that help? Why is that important for you? What does that mean? What will that mean you can do? What impact will that have? You're trying to take what they've said and turn it into something more impactful, something more meaningful. So you can use the follow-up to create impact and meaning as well as clarity. As a pro tip, because you've got to this point in the video, if you add time into anything, it will make it better or it will make it much worse. So if you've got a candidate who's talking about why they're not happy in their role, and you ask them, okay, well, you know, if this carries on for the next 6 months, a year, how are you going to feel about that? Or if all this nonsense, if all this aggravation carries on for another 6 months, a year, what's that going to mean for you? Now, please, we're not therapists. Try and stay away from how would that make you feel. We're not therapists. We're not nasty journalists. We're just trying to probe more. We're trying to create impact. If you add time to something bad, if you imagine something bad carrying on and on and on and on into the future, it weighs more. It weighs you down eventually. On the other hand, if you think about something positive, getting better and better and better as time goes on, you know, well, when that works and you're able to do that and you've got this new role in place and everything's working out great and you've got the promotion, you've got the pay, what's that going to, you know, 6 months from now, what's that going to mean for you? And, you know, a year from now, how good's that going to be? Or a year from now, how well is that going to work out for you? And you're projecting somebody into the future with all the good stuff. And the more they think about the good stuff in the future, the more positive they feel about it. And if you were really listening and watching, you'd have heard and seen that I was setting those up as I was going on. So if you project, if you think about all that good stuff, 6 months, a year from now, that's the setup. What will it mean? That's the question. Does that make sense? That's the pro tip. Add a time into it. It will either make it worse or it will make it better, depending on whether you're talking about positives or negatives. If you're interested in becoming better as an influencer and recruiter, if you look down in the description below, you'll find a link to the 20 most essential sales skills for recruiters. And if you sign up for that, the workbook, the PDF, is really useful. I mean, comprehensive is an understatement. It will also sign you up for the mailing list, which means that you will never miss out on all the influence tips and all the recruitery goodness that is coming through. If you've liked this video, hit the like button, obviously. If you want to see more of it, hit the notification and the subscribe button. And if you have any questions, put them down in the comments, or if you want to ask them privately, you can DM me on either LinkedIn or Facebook, and I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. Hopefully this has been useful, and I will see you again next time.